I'm walking through the Reformation series that Desiring God put together to give you a fuller history of Christianity. Join me.
So, when we talk about the Protestant Reformation, who pops into your head? Luther, right? Calvin, probably, but there's this other key figure, Heinrich Bullinger, the man who held Zurich together for more than 40 years. He's often painted as this straightforward hero, but you know what? The real story is way more complex and honestly way more interesting. So, let's get into it.
First off, you just gotta love the nickname he earned, the Majestic Beard of Zurich. I mean, come on, it's fantastic. It just paints this picture, doesn't it? A man of real stature, of undeniable presence.
But hey, a great nickname isn't the whole story, is it? So let's dig past the incredible facial hair and the simple hero narrative to figure out who the real Heinrich Bullinger actually was.
To do that, we first have to really understand the popular version of his life, the story that's usually told. You know, the heroic tale of a man who stepped in at a critical moment to save the day.
And look, the timeline of his career is genuinely impressive. He converts as a teenager, and then, boom, by his late 20s, he's taking over one of the most important jobs in the Protestant world because its famous leader, Ulrich Zwingli, was just killed in battle. And then he holds that job for a whopping 44 years. Think about that. He literally shapes generations.
And this is really the core of that heroic legacy. He's the guy who steadied the ship, he was a theological innovator, a unifier, and even a symbol. And that majestic beard? Yeah, that wasn't just a fashion statement. It was a big, hairy protest against the Catholic Church's rule that clergy had to be celibate.
So, the bottom line of this popular narrative is simple. Bullinger was the patient, steady hand who saved the Zurich Reformation from totally falling apart after its fiery founder died.
But you knew there was a but coming, right? Of course, history is almost never that neat and tidy. So we have to ask, is that heroic tale the complete picture?
Okay, so let's start by doing a little fact-checking on this popular story. Now, the sources we're digging into aren't saying the story is false. Not at all. But they are arguing that it's a highlight reel. It's simplified, and it leaves out some incredibly important and pretty uncomfortable context. This table kind of breaks it down for us. The basic facts of his life and career, yep, that's all accurate, well documented. But his theology gets a simplified warning. It's presented as this finished product when it was really a work in progress. The claim about him reading a flat Bible, the sources call that misleading. And maybe the biggest one, his role in the persecution and drowning of the Anabaptists, the context is just gone, omitted entirely from the hero story.
And honestly, it's this uncomfortable, missing piece of the puzzle that changes everything about how we understand Bullinger and his legacy.
Let's talk about one year in particular, 1527. This year marks a really chilling turning point, not just for Zurich, but for the whole Reformation.
Because in 1527, an Anabaptist named Felix Mons was publicly drowned right there in Zurich. And this wasn't just some tragic argument that got out of hand. This is widely considered the first time Protestants officially executed another Christian over their religious beliefs. And Bullinger's own theological arguments defending infant baptism were used by the state to justify it.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk theology. You'll often hear this critique about Bullinger and Zwingli, that they read a flat Bible. The idea is that they basically saw no difference between the Old and New Testaments, that they just applied the same rules across the board and kind of missed the boat on what was new about Jesus.
But again, is it that simple? The sources we're looking at say no. For a little perspective, check out this quote from Irenaeus, a super early church father from the 2nd century. He talks about Christ extending and fulfilling the law, not just erasing it. It's a much more nuanced idea than what the flat Bible accusation suggests.
And you can see this big theological shift in how they approach something as fundamental as worship. On one side, you have the Zurich reformers. They got rid of church music. They were really wary of anything that appealed to the senses. It was a huge, sharp break from tradition. Compare that to 1,500 years of Christianity. The early church was all about music, beauty, mystery. Those things weren't distractions. They were seen as essential parts of worship.
So, that brings up a really good question. Why does this simpler, heroic story stick around? Well, our source points to some pretty powerful storytelling tricks or narrative devices that make the story easy to remember and repeat.
And these are so powerful because they tap into stories we already know and understand. You've got the faithful son trope, with Bullinger taking over for the fallen father, Zwingli. The beard becomes this simple, easy symbol of reform. The survival of Zurich is framed as, God's will.
And this last one is the most disturbing, redemptive violence. It's a way of recasting something horrible like persecution as something necessary for the greater good.
So when you put all these pieces back together, the good, the bad, and the very uncomfortable, you end up with a portrait of a man who is so much more complicated and, more human than the simple hero of the legend.
So if we had to rewrite the definition of Bullinger's legacy, what would it say? Maybe something like this. He was absolutely a stabilizing leader. But, and this is a huge but, that stability was built on a kind of theological rigidity. It created unity, for sure, but it did it by pushing out and even persecuting anyone who didn't fit the mold.
And this last quote just nails the fundamental difference here. Where Zurich saw reform through precision, the Fathers saw fulfillment through mystery. It's really about two totally different ways of seeing the world and seeing faith itself.
Which leaves us with one last thing to think about, and it's a big one. This isn't just about Bullinger or the 16th century. It's about us, right now. The stories we choose to tell about our heroes, they have real power. They shape what we believe and how we act. So the real question is, how are these simple hero stories, with all their missing pieces, still shaping our world today?